sermons today all tell us that we're doing the Feast of the Transfiguration. For those of you who are not sort of liturgically and church year oriented, in the Episcopal Church and in other traditions, when there are feast days, some of those feast days are what we call take precedence of a Sunday. And this is one of those, which means that we're not following the usual order of Sundays after Pentecost. There's a set of lessons that we could have used, that we would have used if it weren't August 6th, but today is August 6th. And back in March, I had been invited in a different congregation to serve on August 6th and said, I don't really want to do that. I've been preaching on the Transfiguration for over 30 years, and it comes at least twice a year. When it falls on a Sunday, when the Feast of the Transfiguration falls on a Sunday, it comes 3 times. That's a lot of sermons on the Transfiguration, and I kind of went, yeah, I don't know, I'm too bored with it. I don't really think I have anything to say to anybody else that won't bore me. And if it's going to bore me, likely to bore somebody else. But then I went to Israel in April, and so when I was called by Celeste if I would do today, I went, maybe I have something different to say. I have a different perspective, having been to the Church of the Transfiguration, which sits on top of Mount Tabor, which is a hill, I would call it a hill, not a mountain, that is in the middle of a plain. It's kind of like an upside-down ice cream cone, if you would think, that a little bit rounded, not too super pointy at top, that you can see from a distance, and from its top, you can see 360 degrees. It's really quite remarkable, and it's quite a steep hill to go up. We had to get out of our tour bus and onto smaller buses to be taken to the top. And it was really quite windy and cold up there. They sell a lot of shawls and sweatshirts when you're at the transition point. You may have been to places where that happens. There are a number of places that I've been to where, one gets really chilly at the top and comes down and go, oh yeah, I really need something to keep me warmer. So it's like that. And it's relatively dry in that area, so kind of an arid vegetation. There are some trees, old trees, but you get the sense that it's really fairly open and empty. So think of that, where the 3 disciples plus Jesus walked up this hill. You can see Nazareth. Nazareth's on another hill at the distance. So you can see Mount Tabor from Nazareth. You can see Nazareth from Mount Tabor. You can't quite see the Sea of Galilee, but it's between Nazareth and the Sea of Galilee. And there are some people who think that it's not, that the Transfiguration happens someplace further north. I actually think that it's probably a pretty good location, because if Jesus was in the Sea of Galilee, Capernaum, Nazareth area, and then was going to Jerusalem, it makes sense that he would go up to Mount Tabor. So we have this experience that we hear this morning, not unlike, and why we always read something from Exodus about Moses. It's not just because Moses and Elijah show up in the gospel, but because Moses' shining face kind of prefigures Jesus' transfiguration. And there's a sense in which we have this experience of Jesus being so transfigured, changes his appearance, that there's a real sense of awe and a certain amount of fear hear in the Old Testament, in the Exodus reading, we hear the Israelites were scared enough of the way Moses just looked that, whenever he went to talk to God and came down and his face was transfigured, they made him put a veil on until the next time he went to talk to God. Jesus' transfiguration seems not to have lasted that long. And so he doesn't have to put a veil over his face. And apparently only the three who were with him saw that transfiguration. But there was a glow about him that is like how we might encounter people or ourselves when we come into the full presence of God. It can be scary. It can be beautiful and scary at the same time. It can be disorienting. We can have an experience of God that leads us to see the world in a very different way than we saw before. And that can affect the people around us. And sometimes we have that experience when we gather together in community, and sometimes we have that experience when we're by ourselves. So there are those who meditate and experience God being really imminent, as in we think we are very much in the presence of God and we feel that, and sometimes it's not quite as tangible, or we're not quite so sure. But we gather together here on Sundays and at other times of the week to experience the presence of God in the Eucharist. I said at 8 o'clock in some traditions that's important enough that people will want to experience communion every day. In some traditions, once a day is plenty, thank you very much. Even if you're serving in multiple services in a day, you're only allowed to take communion once. Kind of strange to me, but that's the way some folks are. There are some people who want communion daily, and then there are some traditions where thank you very much, once a quarter is enough. Being that intimately connected with God in a tangible way seems to be more than we want on a regular, very often kind of basis. So how we relate to this intimate relationship with God varies. We have different ways of doing that. But all of us who are believers and who have had experience of being in God's presence have some sense in which being connected with God is important. And being in the presence of God is important. And it's important for a couple of reasons in my mind. One of those is it helps us understand our relationship with God. One of the things that Jesus heard, the disciples heard on Mount Tabor was, "This is my son, my beloved." So Jesus knew that God loves him. The disciples knew that God considers him not just beloved, but well beloved. And we get the assurance that we too are beloved. And we get that assurance in this case as Jesus is going towards his death. His face will be set towards Jerusalem from here on out in the Gospels. And he knows that things are going to get really, really, really tough. The disciples carry that memory with them, as well as Jesus himself. And that helps them get through the difficulties of Jesus' arrest and crucifixion and through to the resurrection. For us, who are on the other side of all of those events, it gives us the sense that whatever trouble we're going through, we're not alone, that God is with us, that we too carry that light, that shining in us. Sometimes it's more manifest than others. We can be transfigured. Some of you may have the experience of being around somebody who's, what do we call it? We describe it as they were beaming, right? They were beaming with joy or awe, and that can be very attractive. And so some of it is that we're invited to beam ourselves, to be connected enough with Jesus, to be connected enough with that belovedness that we are and that everybody else is, that we can invite others into that life of being valued and knowing our worth enough that it doesn't matter what happens in the world around us, that we know who we are. Yesterday I was at a board retreat for the Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake, and we were talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And one of the things that we talked about is the need for resilience and the need for helping people understand that they have worth even when they come across or experience repeated experiences where they're devalued. Jesus gives us the antidote to being devalued. Jesus gives us that message that we are beloved, that we are valued by God, and that we are given the opportunity and the responsibility to proclaim that to the people around us. We can do that when we come into the presence of God and get rejuvenated, or the spark in us gets rekindled or refreshed in a way that enables us to go out into the world believing and knowing that we're of value, and so are the people around us, and so are the people that society wants to tell us aren't. Whether it's because of gender identity or physical ability or age, either lack of it or too much of it. You know, we have, or the way we look. There are all kinds of ways in which our society says you're not worthwhile. And the gospel message is repeatedly, over and over, yes, you are. And so are the people around you. And so we come and we celebrate this feast to remember that God valued Jesus, and God values you and me and the people that we have a tendency to devalue ourselves. Transfiguration is about really absorbing the belovedness that God offers each one of us. And so it is our joy and our privilege and our responsibility